Jayden Parkinson came from a broken home, but all things considered, she was relatively happy and well-adjusted. However, that changed when she was 15 and fell in love with a man 5 years older than she was. Sadly, he began manipulating, isolating, and abusing her almost immediately. Jayden's friends and family members knew things weren't going well and that she was making bad choices, but no one could have guessed just how suddenly and tragically it would all end. Before we begin, we would like to express our sincere condolences to Jayden's family and friends who are still coming to grips with her loss more than a decade later. Jayden was born in Folkestone, Kent, in the United Kingdom on September 26, 1996. As the youngest of 3 children, she was cute, feisty, and outgoing. She would also be outspoken and sometimes downright ornery, but nearly everyone was drawn to her warm and bubbly personality. Jayden's parents split up when she was just 7 years old. She lived with her father after the separation, and he let her do pretty much anything she wanted. But Jayden always missed her mother, Sam, and she did eventually move in with her in Didcot in Oxfordshire, about 60 miles or 96 kilometers west of London. Living together was not easy for Jayden or her mother because of their strong personalities, leading to a number of epic clashes. However, they always shared a strong bond, but it would be put to the test like never before when Jayden began dating Ben Blakely. At the time, Jayden was 15, Ben was 20. Sam wasn't crazy about the age difference, but Ben was courteous and polite when Jayden brought him home for the first time. That being said, Sam realized early on that her daughter's new boyfriend wasn't what he initially appeared to be. She found out that Ben was a notorious bad boy who drank and used drugs. One night after they had been dating for a few months, Jayden's mother notices a suspicious scratch under her eye. Jayden claimed that the family cat did it, but Sam didn't believe her. On another occasion, Jayden changed clothes in front of another girl her age while she and her mother were visiting friends. The girl noticed a number of burns and bruises on Jayden's breasts. Jayden eventually told her that Ben was responsible for the injuries, and when her mother found out, she was told to stop seeing and communicating with him immediately. But by then, Jayden was having a hard time living under her mother's roof and abiding by her rules. Additionally, Ben was systematically isolating her from the very friends and family members who loved her and who had her best interests at heart. Nonetheless, Jayden stayed with her mother because she and Ben broke up temporarily and she had nowhere else to go.
Distancing them from any sort of support system that they may have, whether this is family or friends, distancing them from any sense of their own kind of identity. So who you are is nothing without me.
Sadly, the situation continued to worsen. She had begun stealing things from her mother's home, pawning them, and then giving the money to Ben so he could buy drugs. Sam confronted Jayden when she found out what was going on, and things got so unbearable that she moved out in late November 2013 when she was just 17 years old. Jayden lived on the streets and with friends for a few weeks, but she ultimately moved into the 1 Foot Forward hostel in Oxford, about 12 miles or 19 kilometers away from her mother's home in Didcot. 1 Foot Forward provided accommodation and various support services for teenagers like Jayden, who were homeless and dealing with dependency and domestic abuse issues. Jayden and Ben got back together shortly thereafter, but he was prohibited from visiting her at the hostel. She could see him outside whenever she wanted to, but when she was there, she usually stayed in her room alone. When one concerned staff member asked her why, she said that her boyfriend forbade her from coming out for meals, showers, and even to use the bathroom unless it was an emergency. By then, Ben's control was so complete that Jayden barely bathed, survived on little more than cookies, chips, and sodas, and urinated in empty water bottles instead of using the bathroom just down the hall.
It's clear that she's under his control to such a point that she's fearful of literally living her life.
To make sure that none of his rules got broken, Ben told Jayden that he had spies at the hostel who were watching her. He even told her about an ex-girlfriend he'd assaulted for breaking similar rules. And Ben wasn't just blowing hot air or making idle threats. He had actually abused a number of girls over the years. One of his first was 16-year-old Kirsty Penford. In the spring of 2007, when she was nearly 8 months pregnant with his child, Ben squeezed her throat, threatened to stab her in the stomach to kill the baby, and then pushed her down a flight of stairs in the apartment. Thankfully, Kirsty survived and gave birth in 2008, but the police were called to the hospital to intervene when Ben waltzed into the nursery and threatened to take the baby. Later, Ben would have similar violent and dysfunctional relationships, and each time he targeted young women with low self-esteem who grew up in unstable homes. Like many abusers, Ben blamed his victims for the violence he committed against them. Then, in 2013, when it seemed like things couldn't possibly get worse, Jayden found out she was pregnant. After the initial shock wore off, she decided that the baby was just what she and Ben needed to make a fresh start. She foolishly hoped that fatherhood would motivate Ben to change his ways, but when she told him, he called her a whore and said the baby wasn't his. This didn't surprise Jayden because she had told him that she'd slept with someone else during one of their previous splits. Jayden was sure that Ben was the father, but he didn't want anything to do with the baby, and she broke up with him on or about the 24th of November 2013. Afterward, one staff member at 1 Foot Forward said that she seemed happier than she'd been in ages. But Ben was so outraged that Jayden had allegedly slept with someone else and dumped him that he told her he was going to post dozens of naked pictures and videos of her all over social media. She was terrified that he would actually do it and that would ruin her life. She begged him to reconsider, but he would not relent. He even said that he hoped she'd kill herself, and Jayden called the police on November the 27th and told them what Ben was planning to do.
That he had threatened to put on social media. And that really, really distressed Jayden. And she was really worried about that and really didn't want that to happen. She reported that around the end of November.
Jayden was in and out of the hostel over the next few days, but she was anxious and stressed out because she knew the images and videos could be posted at any moment. Nonetheless, Jayden seemed happy and optimistic by December the 4th when she met her mother at a local pub to tell her she was pregnant. At first, Sam was distraught. She knew Ben would continue to abuse Jayden and that he might even abuse the child.
She was blossoming, she was blooming. Do you know what I mean? She didn't want to not have that baby. I've got pictures of me and her hugging that day in the pub, and you can see the absolute pleasure on her face, but you can see the absolute horror in mine.
The way she saw it, Jayden had 3 options. She could keep the baby and raise it on her own, put it up for adoption, or terminate the pregnancy. Jayden said that she wanted to keep the baby, and Sam knew that she wouldn't change her mind. She eventually asked Jayden to move back in with her so they could raise the baby together and give it a relatively stable home. Jayden considered the offer, but ultimately declined on the grounds that she didn't want to bring any more trouble into her mother's home. This seemed to indicate that she had some inklings that things were about to go from bad to worse. Later, Jayden and her mother hugged outside of the pub and made plans to meet the following Friday to buy maternity clothes. Later that afternoon, at 3:31 p.m., Jayden told a staff member at the hostel that she was meeting her ex-boyfriend to make amends and to convince him that he was the father of her unborn child. The staff member urged her not to go because she knew how dangerous and unpredictable Ben was. Sadly, Jayden didn't take that advice. Staff members at the hostel got worried and called Jayden's mother when she hadn't returned by the following morning. But when Sam said she had no idea where she was, they called the Thames Valley Police and reported her missing.
Jayden was reported missing just after midnight on the 4th of December, and she was reported missing by staff at the hostel that she was living at in Oxford.
Later that same day, Ben was arrested, but ironically, it didn't have anything to do with Jayden's disappearance. Instead, he was charged with possessing indecent images and videos of Jayden and threatened to post them against her will about a week before in late November. Ben was released later that day, but at that point, the Thames Valley Police thought Jayden may have disappeared voluntarily. The fact that she had gone missing before and each time showed up eventually no worse for wear.
Jayden had a difficult upbringing, and she had a lot of arguments with her family. And there was a number of times when Jayden had gone missing, but she'd always returned very shortly after going missing, or she'd always made contact with her family. So it wasn't unusual in those early hours of that investigation. Officers wouldn't have been that surprised that she'd gone missing.
However, that did not mean the authorities weren't actively working on tracking her down. In fact, the head of the Major Crimes Unit for the Thames Valley Police, Chris Ward, assigned a family liaison to look into the matter. They began interviewing Jayden's friends and family members, as well as residents and staff at the hostel. Unsurprisingly, Ben Blakely's name just popped up over and over. Investigators learned that he had manipulated, controlled, and physically abused Jayden during their 9-month relationship. To a person, everyone said that if anything happened to Jayden, Ben definitely had something to do with it. Ben immediately became the main suspect, but in hindsight, investigators may have missed a golden opportunity to connect the dots and catch a killer. However, they knew from past experience that Jayden might already be deceased. Then again, if she was alive and being held somewhere against her will, time was of the essence. Eventually, dozens of investigators worked the case from every conceivable angle. They found it troubling that Jayden hadn't withdrawn any money, used her phone, or accessed the internet since she went missing. Next, they combed through untold hours of CCTV camera footage to see if Jayden turned up. And to their amazement, they found footage of her and Ben at an Oxford train station at 4:06 p.m. on December the 3rd. Shortly thereafter, they could be seen at the train station in Didcot, too. At approximately 10 p.m., Ben was seen at the Didcot train station once again, but this time he was alone and walking far more quickly than he had been earlier. He was also wearing a hoodie, looking down at the ground like he didn't want his face to be seen by the security cameras. And this wasn't just coincidental, because the citizens of the UK know they're almost always being filmed by CCTV footage, as there are approximately 5 million CCTV cameras placed in public areas around the country. The footage established that Ben and Jayden had been together shortly before she was reported missing. Next, investigators found suspicious footage of a young man struggling with what appeared to be an inordinately heavy suitcase at approximately 2 a.m. on December the 4th in a field in Upton, about 2 miles from the Didcot train station. The pale blue suitcase was approximately 3 feet long and 2 feet wide, and it had distinct wheels and a retractable handle. The man's face wasn't visible, but he had a slim build and looked to be in his early 20s, just like Ben. Both the man and the suitcase were seen in Didcot about 30 minutes later. Investigators knew they were onto something, but they still had tons of work to do to connect the dots. Luckily, they got another big break when a taxi driver came forward with a remarkable story. He said he was in Didcot that night and that he gave the young man a ride and helped him get his suspiciously heavy suitcase into the cab. The driver found this odd and a bit alarming because it was so late and the young man seemed very nervous.
Breakthrough, and that was because a taxi driver came forward and said that he had picked up a man in a remote part of Didcot. In the early hours of the morning, this man had a suitcase, a large blue suitcase, and the taxi driver felt that that suitcase was very heavy. He had to help the man into the car with it. And because of the time of day, and because he now knew somebody was missing, he was very worried that something suspicious was in the suitcase.
The taxi company later confirmed that the initial call for service came from Ben's cell phone. When investigators interviewed Ben's grandmother, she said that he had showed up at her home in Didcot a few days before Jayden went missing and borrowed her blue suitcase. She also noticed that there were 2 shovels missing, but they and the suitcase miraculously reappeared just a few days later. Now, with a slew of compelling evidence against Ben, officers from the Thames Police Force arrested him on December the 10th, 7 days after Jayden went missing. During the interview, Ben was uncaring, uncooperative, and downright rude. He said that Jayden had a new boyfriend, that investigators should be talking to him, and that he didn't know where she was or cared what happened to her.
To
my ex-girlfriend.
Okay, what's her name?
You tell me you're the one with
I've got the paperwork.
paperwork.
I've got a lot of paperwork. So it's to do with Jayden Parkinson? Is that your ex-girlfriend?
It is. Listen, I'll be honest with you, yeah? I don't give a where she is. I don't care where she is. She's got a new boyfriend. He can deal with her. She's nothing to do with me now. I'll think of where she is. I'll be honest. I know it sounds nasty. I don't want to be nasty, but that's how it is, and that's the truth. I don't care. All right, so go speak to someone else. Go. You just your CID date. Go hack into her Facebook. You better find her now. Say who nicking me for kidnap, and then you could just hack her internet and find her like that.
In the end, officers had to release him because they still didn't have proof that he had done anything wrong. But by then, they suspected that Jayden was already dead and that her body had been in that suitcase with Ben on that fateful night. Then, 12 days after she disappeared, on December the 15th, Detective Chief Superintendent Andy Murray revealed that the investigation had officially been upgraded to murder. Next, he sent officers and a cadaver dog to search the abandoned barn near Ben's grandparents' home. This was a promising lead because mobile records showed that Ben's phone and probably Ben himself had been there for an extended period of time on December the 3rd. With a missing girlfriend, a heavy suitcase, and 2 shovels, they had a good idea of what he had been up to. The dog detected the scent of human remains, but the body wasn't there. However, they found a bracelet just like Jayden had, hanging from a limb of a bush just outside the barn. They knew Jayden's body probably wasn't very far away, but locating it in rural Didcot would not be easy. To cover as much ground as possible, they employed aircraft with electronic equipment capable of detecting areas where ground had recently been disturbed. 10 possible burial sites were identified, but the ones they checked early went to dead ends. Then they got another break when they interviewed Ben's younger brother, Jake. Investigators immediately knew he was hiding something, and eventually he revealed that he had helped Ben get rid of Jayden's body. He said they buried her at the All Saints Cemetery in Didcot, and more surprisingly, they had put her body inside the grave of their uncle, who had died in 2006. Ironically, his grave was one of the places identified by the search aircraft, but it hadn't been investigated earlier because the ground was regularly disturbed in cemeteries for obvious reasons. Now, with the investigation at a critical juncture, officers, investigators, and forensic experts erected a privacy tent around the grave and got down to the grisly task at hand. On December the 18th, 2013, a young woman's naked, battered, and partially decomposed body was found in the grave just where Jake Parkinson had said it would be. Investigators knew it was Jayden, but her body was in such bad shape that the grisly and heartbreaking task of positively identifying her fell to her already distraught mother, Sam. And even then, she had to rely on a tattoo on Jayden's forearm that was identical to one on her forearm. When Ben was arrested at his home at approximately 10 p.m. on Thursday, December the 12th, he allegedly told officers that he was evil. The medical examiner determined that Jayden had been beaten and that she ultimately died from asphyxiation caused by strangulation. Since bail was denied, Ben remained in custody while both sides prepared for the upcoming trial. Shortly before it began, he and his attorney crafted a letter in which Ben denied murdering Jayden, but admitted to killing her and disposing of her body. Prosecutor Richard Latham discounted Ben's story and refused to accept his plea. The trial finally got underway at the Oxford Crown Court on June 23, 2014. Those in attendance included Jayden's mother, friends, and family members, as well as journalists, attorneys for the prosecution and defense, and the 5 men and 7 women of the jury. 1 Foot Forward staffer, Hannah Ryan, testified first. In front of the hushed courtroom, she recounted how meek and afraid Jayden had become under Ben's constant pressure and abuse. Later, 3 of Ben's former girlfriends took the stand and told of the horrible abuses they had suffered at his hands over the years. Kirsty Penford said she and Ben had only been dating a few months when she found out that she was pregnant. When prosecutor Latham asked how Ben responded to the news, she said that he accused her of cheating and claimed the baby wasn't his. Later, she added that she was not only hurt by his reaction but scared for her safety as well. Ben erupted into expletive-filled tirades on multiple occasions during the damning testimony. The judge warned him about his behavior more than once, and at one point he was removed from the courtroom while the trial continued without him. Then, when it seemed like the heartbreaking trial would never end, Ben took the stand to tell his side of the story. According to him, he and Jayden had a heated argument on a railway bridge just outside of Didcot. He admitted to pushing her and squeezing her throat with both hands. He even had the gall to say that he had strangled her just like that countless times before, which is why he thought she was pretending to be hurt when she collapsed onto the ground that night. Ben claimed that he tried to revive her multiple times, but that there was nothing he could do because she was already dead. Next, he buried her body at the barn near his grandparents' home, and later he and Jake moved it to the All Saints Cemetery because, as he put it, he wanted to give her as proper a burial as possible. When the month-long trial was finally over, the jury left the courtroom and deliberated for just 20 hours before returning with an 11-1 majority vote. In the end, neither they, the judge, nor Jayden's friends and family members bought Ben's story. In fact, the jury believed that he intended to kill her and that he did it with malice and then moved her body to the All Saints Cemetery because he didn't think her body would ever be discovered in her uncle's grave. Ben Blakely was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 20 years. He was also given 8 years to be served concurrently for perverting the course of justice. This charge stemmed from his attempt to prevent justice from being served by lying to investigators. But true to form, Ben remained stoic and defiant as Judge Patrick Eccles read the sentence aloud in the Oxford Crown Court. Moments later, one unidentified person from the public seating area yelled that they'd see Ben in hell. Afterward, Jayden's family released a pre-prepared statement. It said that the conviction was not the end to their family tragedy, and that none of them would ever have an iota of forgiveness for the evil young man who murdered Jayden in cold blood. Ben's conviction was the last episode in a long series of events that began almost immediately after he and Jayden met. And despite all of the early warning signs, it went unchecked and continued to escalate until the brutal murder of Jayden and the attempt to hide her body. Jake Blakely admitted to lying to police, but he was acquitted of charges related to helping dispose of her body because he thought they were burying guns or dead animals. If you found this case compelling, don't forget to like the video, comment down below your take on it, and please subscribe to the channel. Also, hit the notification bell to stay up to date each time we reveal a new shocking case. Until next time, stay safe and keep your eyes peeled. You never know what's lurking in the shadows.